A United Nations expert who published a report saying there were reasonable grounds to believe Israel has committed genocide in its war on Gaza says she has received threats. Francesca Albanese, the special reporter on the human rights situation in the occupied Palestinian territories, presented a report titled Anatomy of a Genocide. The report presented to the UN Human Rights Council on Tuesday was rejected by Israel. Albanese told Al Jazeera, quote, "Yes, I do receive threats. Nothing that so far I considered needing extra precaution. Pressure, yes, and it doesn't change either my commitment or the results of my work," unquote.
In the report presented to the UN, Albanese said there are clear indications that Israel has violated the UN Genocide Convention in its war. In one of these findings, Albanese said that Israel's leadership and soldiers have intentionally, quote, subverted their protection function in an attempt to legitimize genocidal violence against the Palestinian people. Now, Israel criticized Albanese, saying that she was delegitimizing the very creation and existence of the state of Israel. What do you make of this, Jessica?
So I think it's silly that it's even a debate, because you have Israeli lawmakers. Nissim Vaturi was one of the ones that had statements come under fire at the ICJ. He tweeted in October that we must erase Gaza. Nothing else will satisfy us. Don't even leave a child there, because then we could see a resurrection of the Palestine that we see today. And to tweet things like this in Hebrew, where not many people hit translate this tweet, but to just say the quiet part out loud, to say explicitly, as an Israeli politician, this is what I would like to see in Gaza, it's very obvious that they're admitting to the genocide in their own language, but wanting to deny that that's their intent to the international community. In today's day and age, with this technology, where we can translate their statements and get access to them here in the United States and around the world, you can't hide something you've admitted to doing. You obviously have genocidal intent if you're saying erase Gaza, there will be no Palestinian state after this, leave behind no children, making statements like the people of Gaza are animals. It's ridiculous to attack someone else for simply saying what it is and explaining what you've admitted to have the intent of doing in a report.
I don't know which statements you're referring to there. The statements that about animals, I believe, are nearly always directed at Hamas, a terrorist organization that attacked Israel and which they are at war with. Look, I think it's absolutely fine and desirable to criticize actions Israel is taking. I have advocated not continuing to fund Israel's war effort. I don't know why it's any of the United States' business or why U.S. taxpayers should be on the hook for what seems like basically a civil war in another part of the world. I don't see how this enhances American security, and I don't think it's something we, a nation that is in debt, should have to pay for. That said, I think Israel's goal of eliminating the terrorist organization that neighbors it and which is at war and which attacked it is a totally reasonable goal, and thus I have a hard time seeing it as genocide, but rather just conventional warfare between a much more powerful nation state and a terrorist and governing organization that killed 800 or 1,200 of its citizens and members of its military.
I think the categorization of a terrorist group is something that a lot of people across the world need to reflect on. The United States government tends to call any entity around the world that has different interests from the United States and takes up arms a terrorist group. When you have people living in Palestine being pushed out of their homes by the Israeli military, we refer to them as the Israeli Defense Forces, when in fact what they're doing is pushing children, mothers, and fathers out of their homes so that they can then take them as a part of their own land. That is terrorism. To target children with drones, that is terrorism. To deprive people of food so that they're starving and eating grass, that's terrorism. Those are all actions of the Israeli military. So to categorize Hamas as terrorists for fighting Israel and to say that they are human animals, it is dehumanizing. And to have someone like Nissim Vaturi say, erase Gaza, that is punishing the civilians of Gaza. You also had the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, directly say that there are no innocents in Gaza. There are no innocent civilians in Gaza in a press release, in a statement to the public early on in the war. And so to make statements like that, to hold innocent civilians accountable, even if you say you're targeting Hamas, and to kill 30,000 people, and to say you're comfortable with things like, a 3-to-1 ratio of Hamas killed versus innocent civilians killed, you're basically admitting to genocide. And to have a lot of these, former Mossad folks go on, like Mark Lamont Hill's show on Al Jazeera, for example, and when they're asked if they were Israeli children, would you still be okay with them being collateral damage, and them not being able to give a response, it's very clear that they've made the calculation that the people of Gaza will be an expense of this war. And that is, by definition, a genocide, to wipe out a population of people and to deny them a state after the war, which is another thing they've explicitly said. So they've admitted to the genocide they've been accused of already.
I call them terrorists, Hamas terrorists, because they shot people in their homes, in their cars, at a music festival. I saw the piled up dead bodies, absolute non-combatants, young people celebrating, partying, running for their lives, and then gunned down. I mean, that's just, it's a terrorist action. Nothing justifies it. It was not constrained against a legitimate military target. It's terrorist behavior, and now they're paying the consequence for that. And do I think the people, I think it's horrible, obviously, the civilian casualties in Gaza. I think it's terrible. I think it should end immediately, hopefully with the surrender of Hamas, the people responsible for the attack and the people who govern that region. But there's probably some blame being assigned because polls show widespread support for continued violence against Israel among the people of Palestine. And if they support that kind of action, this is what happens in response. I don't think it's a good idea for a weaker, even in cases where my sympathies are absolutely unreserved, like for, I don't know, people in the Uyghurs or Taiwan or something. I absolutely think they should have rights to self-determination and to be free of Chinese authoritarian tyranny. I would not advise them to start randomly shooting Chinese citizens. If they did that, I would say that was an act of terrorism. I would say don't do that, and the repercussions would be obvious and swift. And so why it's different in this case gets to me that I think it's a kind of anti-Israel bias on behalf of the UN, frankly.
I don't think so, because the UN's comprised of many member nations. Over 90% are voting in the direction of wanting a ceasefire and condemning Israel's actions. So it's not the UN, it's people all across the world. And those people that are ambassadors to the United Nations are representing huge populations of people who see what Israel is doing as wrong. Because to categorize October 7th as the beginning of this conflict and say, well, this was a horrific act and Israel can do whatever it needs to defend itself, including killing 30,000 people in Gaza, it just doesn't make much sense. Because when you look at 1948 and you look at what Israel did then, the slaughter of Palestinian people, pushing them out of their land, taking Israel as a state of their own, and then occupying the Palestinian territories, we didn't say Palestine can do whatever they want to do in defense after that. Instead, we decided to defend Israel as a state. And whether that's because our country has a lot of Christian Zionists in power who want the Holy Land to be controlled by the Jewish people, as many of them has said, because it's a part of the Bible and it's prophecy that Jesus is there, or because the reason we support Israel is simply because they have stock in Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and they want to make some money off of this. It doesn't really matter the reason, but it seems that there is not an equal playing field given. There's not an equal set of moral standards given to the Israeli army in their response to October 7th and to the Palestinian people in their response to the Nakba and Israeli colonization and imperialism. And in a segment earlier, we talked about the native people and that it would probably be very messy and not a feasible solution if we were to give Florida back to the native people. But time and again, the argument is made that the reason that Israel has claim to this territory is because they're native to it. But those same people wouldn't want the natives to take control in the United States. So there's so much hypocrisy on the side of supporting Israel and simply saying it's wrong to kill 30,000 people, it's wrong to starve a population. It's very easy to say those things. And I think that's why we see, over 90% of the member nations of the United Nations very critical of what Israel is doing and wanting a ceasefire.
That does it for us today on Rising, but Jessica will be back here tomorrow. You'll definitely want to tune into that. She'll be joined, of course, by Amber Duke So please tune in for the usual Friday show, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who also like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can listen to podcasts. Thanks so much for filling in today, Jessica. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Robbie. Bye, y'all.